crazy? You want me to hit you?
That's right.
What, like in the face?
Surprise me.
Brad Pitt here is just a figment of Edward Norton's imagination. You see, Norton is playing someone with a hidden aspect to his personality. Again. And again. Oh, for crying out loud. And spoilers for the following Scooby-Doo episodes. During a visit to the better side of Niagara Falls, the gang become lost and find themselves staying the night in an old sanitarium where the ghost of a mad doctor puts more in danger than just their chance for a good night's sleep. Continuing the Scooby tradition of visiting exciting locales like ghost towns, Chinatown, Hollywood, and Mexico, the gang finally visit what could be the most exotic land of all: Canada.
Relax, you two. There's nothing to worry about.
Is now the time to be practicing your ventriloquism, Fred? Keep your concentration on the road. That's dangerous weather you're driving through.
It's a roadblock. Jeepers, what's going on?
I'm Officer Oldfield of the Royal Canadian Border Patrol.
This is another Scooby episode where the villain's real name is never specifically stated. We're introduced to him as Officer Oldfield, but later told he was just posing as law enforcement. To keep things simple, I'm going to keep referring to him as Oldfield for the purposes of my analysis.
Be sure to take the left fork ahead. Foster Road. It'll take you to the main highway. Don't take the right fork. There have been lots of weird things happening on that road.
Lightning doesn't work like that. If it struck that wooden sign, it would not have gently turned it around. It would have blasted it to pieces. Have you seen what lightning does to trees?
There it is, Foster Road.
Setting aside the indestructible sign, Fred was told that he needed to go left at the fork and definitely not go right. If he ignores explicit directions like this, is it any wonder half the episodes seem to begin with the gang getting lost on the way to somewhere?
Hey, an ambulance.
Let's follow him.
If they ever give up mystery solving, Daphne's suggestion here might indicate an aptitude for law school. Oldfield was the mastermind of an operation to traffic stolen gold into the United States from Canada. He and his henchmen used a dilapidated sanitarium as a hideout where they would smelt the gold into large bricks, which they would then disguise as patients. After placing these patients into an ambulance, they would then drive to a hidden cave where the bars would be further disguised as loaves of bread to smuggle out of the country. In addition to dressing up as the late owner of the sanitarium, crazy Dr. Coffin, who once ran sketchy experiments on mental patients, Oldfield used organ music to control the behavior of 2 guard dogs to frighten off any nosy intruders.
What are they doing?
They're bringing in a new patient.
In this weather? And this time of night?
Zoinks! Like, what's that? Just somebody playing the organ?
They're at a mental hospital, not a church. Why doesn't Fred think it's weird hearing organ music? He thinks patients arriving at night is odd, but a musical instrument in a medical facility played loudly enough that you can hear it from outside is perfectly normal? Wait a minute. A mad scientist is using a mental institution in Canada as cover for a nefarious scheme to smuggle something illegal disguised as food, and he uses an organ to control behavior. Why does that sound familiar?
Looks like we followed them right into a driveway.
And this place is some kind of sanitarium.
Sure looks creepy.
Maybe we could stay here for the night.
Ever notice how the gang never really care where they spend the night? Rundown mansions, farmhouses, creepy sanitariums. They just assume wherever they happen to end up in the evening will be willing to give them a bed. We know they have sleeping bags and are willing to camp outside. Or better yet, why not just take turns driving the mystery machine while the others sleep in the back? The boys get separate beds. Just saying.
Come here.
What's happening?
Once again, we see Velma wearing curlers to bed, despite not having curly hair. I mentioned this once before, and someone replied that curlers can be used, somehow, to straighten hair. Obviously, I'm as much an expert in hair care as I am fitness. But setting all that aside, I can't help but wonder why the producers show Velma going through the hassle of putting curlers in her hair before bed when it's always been Daphne who is the most concerned about her appearance. If anything, Daphne should be the one wearing curlers, or bags, or whatever devices women use to shape their hair while sleeping. If I had to guess, it's the animators once again trying to draw a distinction between Daphne and Velma, as it's a cartoon cliche for the frumpy housewife to always be seen with curlers in their hair or sleeping with a mud mask. This is the first time the villain in a Scooby episode is a cop, which is odd for this point in the franchise as police are never shown in a negative light. Unless you stop to consider what it says about rural law enforcement, that 4 teenagers and a talking dog can solve crimes in a few hours that were baffling the police for weeks or longer. However, as Oldfield was merely posing as a Border Patrol officer, technically a cop wasn't the bad guy here. This is not the first time smugglers were featured in the Scooby-Dooverse, nor the first time we see gold smuggled by reshaping it into other objects. In fact, it's not even the first gold smuggling operation that used food to hide the contraband. Though in the case of the Green Globs, they rendered their gold to a powder, while Oldfield and his crew made their bricks larger than a standard good delivery bar. Keeping the smelting part of their operation in a separate location than their bread wrapping may have been a smart move when it comes to spreading out the risk, because if one hideout was found, the other location had a chance to remain hidden, but I'll discuss this later in the operations section of my analysis. Oldfield's design is not original, but he did seem to take steps to avoid getting caught. So where does that leave things with respect to how profitable the scheme would be? Math time.
They're dead.
It's not what you think, Daphne. Look! Stacks of gold bullion.
With a wig to make us think it was a person.
You know, considering all the Fred memes out there, I'm surprised this frame hasn't been used. The gold bricks seen here are much larger than average, which makes sense as the villains are smelting their own and not simply smuggling good delivery bars typically used by banks. Presumably, they are made this size to be more convincingly disguised as loaves of bread for taking them over the border to the US. American bread loaf sizes can vary in length, anywhere from 12 to 15 inches. However, we see the gold bricks on an ambulance gurney, and as the minimum width of one of those is 24 inches, and the bricks seem to take up most of that space, we can assume they are at least 15 inches long. The average height and width of a loaf of bread is 4.5 inches, but we see the gold bars are in a trapezoidal prism shape. While they're clearly not uniform, most of them appear to have a top width of around half or more the width of the bottom. This would give the full dimensions of the average brick seen here at 15 inches long and 4.5 inches tall, with a bottom width of 4.5 inches and a top width of 2.5 inches. Plugging those dimensions into an online volume calculator makes the average brick a little over 236 cubic inches. 1 cubic inch of gold weighs a little over 11 regular ounces. This makes the average weight of each brick seen here a little over 2,600 ounces, or roughly 160 pounds. Wait a minute. There are at least 15 gold bricks on the gurney. That's over 2,400 pounds, or well over 1 ton. Even specialized stretchers meant to carry morbidly obese people have a maximum weight capacity of less than half that. Those stretchers should have collapsed after the 7th brick.
These will do.
Where did Shaggy go? Speaking of load capacity, the villains were regularly hauling 2 of those gurneys, with a combined weight of just under 2.5 tons, in the back of a 1970s ambulance. Would a vehicle like that be capable of repeatedly transporting that much weight? I'm not a car person, and despite spending a considerable amount of time searching online, I was unable to find an answer. But 2.5 tons is not the weight that vehicle was originally built to hold. Because it's already impossible to determine the exact amount of gold we're dealing with, I'm going to once again ignore the whole ounce versus troy ounce discrepancy when discussing weight and value. All my figures are rough estimates anyway, so the 10% difference between the two measurements isn't worthy of concern. This episode aired in 1976, when the average price of gold was around $125 per ounce. If the average weight of each brick is about 160 pounds, that means each one is worth around $325,000. Ignoring the bricks on the conveyor and any that might still be at the hospital, this stack alone appears to contain 670 bricks and worth almost $218 million. That's $1.2 billion in today's money. This is easily the biggest haul of any Scooby scheme in the franchise so far. We're talking moving a European castle to America stone by stone levels of money here. Oldfield gets a 5 out of 5 for the design. Originality and the risk of getting caught mean very little when you're talking about that much loot. We have seen the ghost of a doctor before, but Dr. Jekyll was more of a mad scientist, which makes Dr. Coffin the first spirit of a medical professional featured as the villain, and thus completely original for the Scooby-Doo-niverse. Oldfield's outfit also passes the special effects test as it glowed repeatedly throughout the episode. We never learn how it glowed, but we don't need that because the effect is clearly seen on screen. It's safe to take it as read he used some form of phosphorescent paint. And with that pale face, green eyes, and pointed ears, capped off with torn lab coat and oversized rubber gloves, Dr. Coffin is also sufficiently frightening enough and likely to have disturbed plenty of kids throughout the years, let alone the Scooby Gang. I don't have much more to say about the outfit. 5 out of 5. As is sometimes the case in a Scooby episode, had the villain taken one action at the beginning, their entire scheme may have gone off without a hitch. In this situation, it would be how Oldfield, disguised as the fake Border Patrol officer, handled the mystery machine after he originally stopped it. Instead of just giving Fred directions, had Oldfield provided the kids with an escort to the fork in the road, that would have been it. We never saw any other vehicles besides the mystery machine, so it's not like Oldfield needed to remain at the road close sign to shoo off other drivers. Though this does assume that in addition to his fake police uniform and badge, Oldfield also had access to a fake patrol car, which is never shown on screen. I mentioned while discussing the design that by spreading out over multiple locations, it would possibly make it more difficult for the authorities to capture the entire operation. I rated this highly then because it showed foresight on the part of Oldfield to keep from getting caught. However, in operational terms, this was fairly stupid. For starters, that cave was huge. There was plenty of room inside to not only house the bread wrapping equipment, but also the furnace needed to smelt the gold into appropriately sized bricks. Speaking of smelting...
You just opened the roof!
Yeah! Like, that's really weird. And look, there's the moon.
I'm bad at science, but even I know there is no physical way possible to get enough moonlight to heat a surface hot enough to burn. While some argue there is a theoretical way to do this, it's certainly not by using a single large mirror like this. Solar furnaces are a thing, and they do incorporate mirrors. But do you notice anything missing from the room? When the gold is melted, where do they pour it? Where are the molds for shaping the gold into bricks? We see a crucible with what looks like melted gold around the edges, and that's it. Incidentally, Fred didn't seem to notice that the crucible was used for melting gold. Sure, the solar furnace itself is a clue, but gold residue seems like it would be an even bigger one. This is like finding a shell casing on the ground and not noticing the puddle of blood surrounding it. Instead of modifying a room at the sanitarium with a massive parabolic mirror and collapsible roof, why didn't Oldfield just build a regular smelting furnace in the cave? That may be keeping all the eggs in one basket in terms of getting caught, but frankly, if the police find your cave, they're probably already aware of your sanitarium hideout. Speaking of which, keeping their solar furnace and stolen gold in the sanitarium only makes it easier for innocent people to stumble onto the operation. considering the mental hospital wasn't technically closed.
How come we haven't seen any patients around this place?
I don't understand it myself. They keep bringing me patients, but they vanish.
Patients would occasionally arrive, which meant likely visits by loved ones. Even if Tewksbury was the only doctor, there would still be support staff like orderlies, receptionists, kitchen workers, and janitors. The 2 henchmen employed by Oldfield would not have been enough to man the sanitarium.
Look out! Guard dogs!
And they're after us!
Uh-oh! The dogs are coming after us!
Like head for the hills!
I'm chalking these up to attempted murder on the part of Oldfield, or at least attempted grave bodily harm, but 2 questions arise.
Wow. Do you see what I see?
It's Scooby and that mad doctor.
Scooby acts like he's under a spell.
He is. It's that weird music.
First, we see here that playing the organ seems to affect all canines, and not just those conditioned to the music, as Scooby is shown entranced while it's playing. However, earlier in the episode when the guard dogs first attacked the gang, Scooby heard the organ music but wasn't affected.
Like he played ghost and used those dogs to scare people away from the sanitarium.
My second question is, why was it necessary to use an organ to hypnotize the guard dogs to chase away intruders? They're guard dogs. That's their job.
We're safe, Scoob. Zoinks! A monster!
The smugglers cast it into human-shaped figures wearing those wigs we found.
Then they shipped the figures by ambulance so the authorities would think they were just patients and let the ambulance go through.
Did Oldfield and his henchmen really need all those wigs? They were only transporting 2 fake patients at a time in the ambulance, so why not just keep reusing the same 2 wigs? Even if they wanted a few extras on hand just in case, there was no need for the dozens shown in the room. Not only were they unnecessary, but a huge pile left on the floor like that was just suspicious as hell.
Oh, excuse me, madam.
Who's the ugly old brother?
Take a look at that ambulance.
Where could they be going?
By the looks of those patients, I'd say the cemetery.
Cemetery?
Yes, because when someone dies in the United States, they just dig a hole in the cemetery and chuck him in without a casket.
We'd better follow them.
When the ambulance left, the gang had been on an upper floor, the girls were in their nightgowns, and Velma was still wearing curlers. Despite the time needed to get changed and down to the mystery machine, they somehow managed to find all the right roads that the ambulance had taken. The only way this timing would have worked is if Daphne and Velma got changed in the back of the van. Here's hoping Dr. Jekyll is the only one in the Scooby-Doo-niverse who would peek.
Warning, bridge out ahead. We better turn back.
Not a chance. The ambulance can make it, we can make it.
Jesus! Fred sounds just like my late grandfather behind the wheel. I was in the back seat this one time and Grandpa drove past a road closed sign on a city street under construction. It was dug down to the roadbed and his car literally dropped as he drove off the paved surface. His argument was that people lived on the street and if they could make it, so could he. Grandpa also once ran a red light with me as a passenger, and when I, quite understandably upset, asked what the hell he was doing, his response was an indignant, "What? Left turn on red." How the hell he managed to live long enough to die of old age in a hospital, I'll never know.
Don't worry, they won't spot us with our headlights out.
It's a secret road through the mountain.
Just gonna start driving with your headlights on again, huh, Fred? So much for not letting the ambulance see you. One final question about the gold heist itself. How in the hell did Oldfield and his crew manage to steal that much gold in the first place? It cannot be stressed enough just how much of the metal we're talking about, as well as the implications of such a robbery. Based on what we see in the episode, they managed to haul away well over 50 tons of gold. It took Simon Gruber over a dozen dump trucks to haul away the gold he stole from the Federal Reserve, and that was by using vehicles that in real life weren't technically capable of hauling that much gold in the first place. At best, the trucks seen on screen were only capable of carrying 500 pounds of gold at a time. Just for the sake of argument, if Oldfield had used the same kind of dump truck shown in Die Hard with a Vengeance, he would have needed to have made over 200 trips from wherever he stole the gold. Setting aside the massive dump trucks used solely for mining, the larger vehicles today have an average load capacity of up to 14 tons. That means even if Oldfield would have had access to one of those, he still would have needed to make at least 4 trips. They don't reveal in the episode where the gold came from originally, but that much had to have been from a government source at the time because few, if any, private organizations would have had that much of the precious metal on hand. This would have been a heist with international ramifications that would have threatened to tank Canada's economy. Yet at the end, we see only a single Mountie to handle the criminals. If this is how Canada handles such a crisis, is it any wonder they sold off their gold reserves by the end of the 20th century? However, despite how ludicrous it is that Oldfield had stolen that much gold, he clearly did because we see it in the episode. He made mistakes, but they were few and not fatal in and of themselves. There were even moments where Oldfield threatened the safety of the gang by sicking the vicious guard dogs on them. I'm giving him an operation score of 4 out of 5. I felt the need to lower his score to acknowledge the severity of his crime and just how much heat should have been felt by him and his crew. The amount of gold he stole was of international importance, so the red fury of the entire Royal Canadian Mounted Police should have been all over the Niagara Falls area looking for any trace of the thieves. The Ghost of Dr. Coffin gets a final due score of 4.7 out of 5. It doesn't feel right to rate him so highly, but looking at the individual numbers, that's how it ended up. I would like to take a moment to thank my new Patreon members and apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names. Molly B. Thank you, Molly B. Matthew Girding. Thank you, Matthew Girding. Thank you to everyone helping support my channel. It absolutely means the world to me. If you'd like to help, there's a link to my Patreon page below, but please only join if you're comfortable doing so. New members get a personal thank you in the next regular video I upload after they join, as well as credits in each regular video for as long as they remain a member. The gang are enjoying dinner in a city sandwich shop when their attention is drawn to a burglary at the coin dealer next door. Chasing the culprit to a toy factory, they run afoul of an extremely creepy zombie determined to keep hold of the large gold coin it had just stolen. Greedy toy factory co-owner, Mr. Dilly, learned of a $1 million reward offered by a shady foreign sultan to anyone who could obtain for him the famous, but cursed, golden galleon coin. Dilly used his toy-making skills to craft a faceless zombie android with an impressive artificial intelligence to not only burglarize the dealer currently in possession of the coin, but to chase with a single-minded determination anyone who takes it for themselves. Wait. Kions? Also, there is no National Numismatic Society in the United States. There is, however, an American Numismatic Society founded in 1858 and located in New York. The closest thing to a National Numismatic Society would be the one founded in South Africa. Numismatic is the fancy lad term for coin collectors.
Oh man, do I hate them fancy lads.
In addition to the robot zombie, we also get an idea as to just how skilled Dilly's engineering abilities are with how he was able to make a machine capable of duplicating living, breathing creatures like dogs with enough lifelike accuracy to bark and eat.
And they're all chicken.
He must have fallen into the toy duplicator.
Let's take a moment to discuss how insane this is. It's okay to hand-wave the occasional moment of cartoon physics, like if Scooby hovers in midair or he and Shaggy survive falls that would kill someone in real life. But we're dealing with what's essentially cloning or replicator technology here. We barely have functional 3D printing right now, but a machine in 1976 is able to perfectly recreate complex organisms?
Will the real Scooby-Doo please stand up? For a Scooby snack?
I'm sorry, you're too late, fellas. They're all gone.
All gone!
If the Scooby duplicates were capable of eating, why didn't they all run out of the room when Velma offered the Scooby snack? Also, what do you suppose they eventually did with the Scooby duplicates? Do we have a Blade Runner situation where they expire on their own after a few years? Or an AI scenario where they're just dumped in a forest somewhere to create their own society of abandoned robots? Or better yet, does this help explain how a Great Dane, a breed with a life expectancy of about a decade, can still be solving mysteries over 50 years after he first appeared? Wait a minute. The gang are pursued by a shambling monster obsessed with the ancient gold coin they're holding, a gold coin that's incidentally involved in a curse, and Scooby ends up duplicated. Why does that sound familiar?
Zoinks! No face!
Dilly's invention further exhibited other extremely impressive features, like the ability to convey emotions like laughter, as well as complex behavior like driving cars. An AI smart enough to drive a car in 1976. They can't even get that right in 2023.
But a zombie? What was that?
That was a zombie.
Velma once again bringing the snark. If Dilly could create a humanoid robot with such amazing dexterity and emotional responses, what the hell was he doing worrying about a penny ante-million-dollar reward? Even considering that in today's money that would be around $5.5 million, the technology he developed would transform human society and be worth billions. The dude was creating Star Trek technology 300 years ahead of its time. Then again, it's not exactly uncommon for geniuses to lack common sense. In Dilly's case, while he was smart enough to build an android capable of committing robberies, he didn't have the foresight to rent a storage locker or other hideout for his creation to lay low until the heat died down, choosing instead to have the zombie return to the toy factory after the theft.
Wow, weird. He went into the Dilly Dally Dolly Company.
Creepers! He's in there!
And if we're gonna solve this mystery, we've got to get in there.
Gosh, I wonder how they'll do that. Also, what's the deal with Shaggy's arm? Are his nethers itchy, or did the animator forget how to draw hands and decided to cheat?
We've got to get somebody in there.
Let me see, Fred. Yikes!
That's not exactly what I had in mind.
Then what did you have in mind, Velma? Are you saying you guys just happened to be watching from a tree with a perfectly positioned mattress and wooden board underneath it, and you got lucky with danger-prone Daphne doing her shtick?
And so are we, fellas. Here you go. Uh-oh. I shifted the wrong thingamajig.
They're trusting danger-prone Daphne with a forklift? You need training to operate one of those safely.
What's that forklift doing there?
Someone's been messing around. Put it back in the garage and then join me in the office.
Uh-oh. Duck.
Ordinarily, a business owner who finds heavy equipment where it's not supposed to be, especially at night and near an open window, would show more concern. If you came home and your car had been moved next to an open window, Would you dismiss it as merely someone messing around? It is possible that Dilly was suspicious, but as he knew his robot was likely at the factory with the stolen coin, he probably didn't want to risk police involvement over a possible break-in.
The legendary curse of the Golden Galleon. In spite of the curse attached to this rare coin, the Sultan of Swahili has offered $1 million for it.
$1 million? Wow!
Swahili is an African language, not a country, though it could also refer to a group of people in the eastern part of that continent. The title of Sultan does evoke an exotic Middle Eastern setting, but come on, Scooby writers. I know this was before Wikipedia, but you guys could have come up with a better name for a fake nation than that.
How do you work this thing?
Are you all right?
See what I mean? You need forklift training or someone's going to get hurt. Setting aside simple human greed, why would Dilly, the co-owner of what appears to be a successful toy company, need such a large amount of money? The factory looks to be in decent operation. There are no cracked walls or spiderwebs anywhere to give the impression of being neglected.
We'll hide in a pile of popcorn.
What are you doing in that popcorn?
Like we were hiding, but it smells so good, now we're eating.
Shaggy already eats off the floor. I suppose he doesn't mind dog hair all over his popcorn either.
And let's have some refreshment before we go to the newsstand, Scoob.
What the hell is up with those colors? It's one thing if the cells weren't given any codes during production, but it literally says orange right there. The factory is also large enough to have a working cafeteria and vending machines that appear to be well stocked, implying that the place would be a beehive of activity during normal working hours.
Don't play with the merchandise, Scooby. If we break it, we may have to buy it.
Aw, shucks.
Since when has Fred ever been worried about breaking stuff during a mystery? We've seen the gang literally destroy museum exhibits before. In Scooby-Doo, villain motivations are usually better spelled out, particularly when the scheme is perpetrated by a business owner. In those situations, they're usually near bankruptcy and are either desperate to save their failing company or they want to quickly get a large amount of cash and disappear. But the Dilly Dally Dolly Company seems to be in good shape. Is it possible Dilly knew his talents were wasted in the toy industry and saw the Sultan's reward as a means of obtaining quick financing for his robot experiments? If that was the case, why didn't he just go to the government for a grant? I think the military would be extremely interested in the idea of expendable human-sized robots capable of driving vehicles and pursuing enemies. Questionable motivations aside, Dilly gets a 3 out of 5 for his design. He set out to steal a gold coin worth $1 million using an android zombie, and it worked, but he didn't plan far enough ahead to handle things afterward. This made the scheme profitable, but dangerous to implement. This is the section where I'm probably going to lose some of you.
The ghost zombie.
Between cartoons like this and my grandfather yanking out his dentures, is it any wonder 5-year-old me was convinced human teeth were able to be removed and put back in so easily? The no-face zombie is absolutely one of the most sinister-looking monsters to appear in the Scooby-Doo-niverse. As a kid, it scared me almost as much as the Space Kook. In fact, if it wasn't for the Space Kook's laugh, this shambling, moaning, uncanny valley traipsing, faceless motherfucker would probably take the top spot as the scariest Scooby-Doo villain for me. Hell, it still creeps me out. That's why I chose it for this video's thumbnail. Having said all that, and I agonized over this decision, because the no-face zombie is a robot and not a bad guy in a suit, that makes it a prop, not a disguise.
Up, down, sideways, who cares? This elevator was taken.
The actual outfit being raided in this episode is what the villain, Mr. Dilly, actually dressed as. A generic gorilla. A generic f***ing gorilla. It's pretty much all downhill from here. Obviously, a gorilla disguise is not original for the franchise. Regular viewers may be somewhat aware by now of the existence of a certain individual who famously dressed as one in the first season of Scooby-Doo Where Are You? A gorilla in a toy factory also makes no sense. Perhaps if the Dilly Dally Dolly Company had a famous gorilla doll or action figure and the story involved one of Dilly's inventions being an enlargement ray like something out of Willy Wonka, this could have worked. But as it was presented here, it is a baffling choice. A choice that came out of nowhere. Imagine watching the Scooby-Doo show and enjoying a mystery involving a creepy, shambling, faceless zombie, only for it to suddenly involve a huge gorilla chasing the gang. Gorillas have inexplicably appeared before in pop culture, especially during the Silver Age of comic books. After one issue featuring a primate on the cover sold extremely well, the publishing company decided to repeatedly feature them on covers for the next several years. It's also possible that Hanna-Barbera wanted to piggyback off the success of the Planet of the Apes franchise, which ended 2 years before, thus exhibiting the studio's usual knack for aping a fad that already died out.
Let's try to catch a ride. Oh boy, like a ride. Thanks, mister.
Look at the size of that interior. Who's driving that car? Doctor Who? Dilly managed to create a lifelike humanoid robot, so it stands to reason he could produce a convincing gorilla suit as well. Considering the size, it's possible it was also a powered exoskeleton augmenting the strength of the operator. This would make it yet another piece of equipment with obvious military applications that Dilly failed to appreciate. This being a power suit is even more likely when it's later implied that the skinny, middle-aged toy maker somehow overpowered the factory's watchman, who was much bigger and likely much stronger. Then again, as is usual with Hanna-Barbera animation at the time, the size of the gorilla frequently changes, as it towers over Fred and the rest during its introduction, but by the end of the episode it shrank enough to comfortably sit behind the wheel of a hearse and is roughly the height of the police lieutenant. Dilly's gorilla disguise is not original, it's not scary, or at least it's only scary because of its size and not because of the design or any special effects, and it had nothing to do with the toy factory in which it was found. The only positive is how realistic it was. 2 out of 5 for the outfit score. If the no-face zombie had been the actual disguise, it would have easily scored a 4. I do feel guilty in a bait-and-switchy kind of way about using the no-face zombie as my thumbnail, but can you blame me? He makes for a great thumbnail image. Dilly's execution of his operation was just one mistake after another. I've already alluded to 2 of them earlier, but they will be repeated here in the interests of clarity. The first mistake was the crime itself. Using advanced technology like a fully autonomous humanoid robot to steal a gold coin for a mere $1 million would be like using platinum as the base metal instead of zinc to counterfeit pennies. I would almost entertain the notion that Dilly was a pacifist who didn't want to see his inventions used for military purposes, but come on. He was immoral enough to commit burglary and kidnapping. I doubt he was above designing hunter-killer robots for the military-industrial complex.
The Golden Galleon, a rare 16th century coin. Over 100 years ago, its owner placed a curse on the coin. He swore he'd reclaim the coin one day, and his zombie has been roaming the earth for centuries to find it.
The coin shop owner says the curse was placed on the Golden Galleon over 100 years ago, but then says the former owner had been a zombie searching for it for centuries. This is just sloppy writing. The Golden Galleon was minted in 1558, over 400 years before this episode's setting. Technically speaking, 400 years ago is over 100 years ago, but saying it that way implies the owner became a zombie sometime in the 1800s, which means he could not have been searching for the coin for centuries. It would have been more clear had the script simply said the original owner placed a curse and has been roaming the earth for centuries to find it. Dilly's second mistake was the design of the no-face zombie itself. While admittedly frightening and likely to scare away plenty of potential witnesses, it wasn't exactly subtle, and not the best way to commit a crime without drawing attention to yourself. Nowhere did the curse say the legendary zombie was faceless or that it dressed in eye-catching purple robes. It would have been a lot smarter had Dilly designed his android zombie with a human face, or if featureless, had it wear a ski mask and dark, nondescript clothing. Had this been the case, the robot could have safely driven around town without drawing attention to itself as it made its way back to the toy factory. Which of course was Dilly's third mistake. There's a reason most smart criminals don't hide their loot or bury their victims' bodies where they live or work, especially if their name is plastered on a huge sign in front. Dilly could have had his robot drive to a warehouse or storage locker rented for the occasion. Or hell, he could have met it at the docks where he would be waiting to board a ship to travel to his overseas buyer. Speaking of the buyer, he was an unscrupulous rich foreign leader who could have easily paid Dilly in advance and had one of his agents waiting to take possession of the Golden Galleon to take back to their country. At worst, if Dilly failed and was arrested, the Sultan would have been out $1 million. And as this was during the 1970s oil crisis years, $1 million to a Middle Eastern monarch would be pocket change. Those guys could have been swimming in transplanted European castles had they wanted to. Dilly's fourth mistake was kidnapping Dally and presumably the Watchman. I say presumably because we only ever saw Dally getting nabbed by the zombie. The fact we don't see the Watchman get caught should have been evidence that he was actually Dilly's henchman and complicit in the crime, but that's not where the Scooby writers went with the episode.
Too bad there were no witnesses.
There was a witness, Lieutenant. I'll call the lieutenant.
Yeah, this is the lieutenant.
But the lieutenant said to wait for him.
Now do you believe us, Lieutenant?
I'm afraid the zombie will never be the same, Lieutenant.
Wow. The Scooby writers were determined not to give that guy a name.
The lieutenant wants us to stay here until he arrives.
Stay here?
Generally speaking, the animation in the Scooby-Doo show exhibited significant improvement over the new Scooby-Doo movies. Generally speaking. Kidnapping is almost always a mistake that usually just increases the likelihood of police involvement. In fact, Dally was kidnapped before the gang were able to get hold of the coin and call the lieutenant, so there was no need for Dilly to resort to such desperate measures in the first place. Had it taken place after the coin was taken and he realized his scheme was unraveling, that might have accounted for him no longer caring if the police showed up at the factory.
You kids stay here in the office. If there's a zombie in the building, we'll find him.
What could be keeping them so long?
I don't know.
Make yourself at home there, Velma. Help yourself to whatever's on the desk. Maybe rifle through some drawers looking for snacks, too. Okay, that's just a magazine, but still. At least get off the desk. That's really rude. The final mistake made by Dilly was a small one, and in the grand scheme of things, not even that important. I'm referring to how he tore out the pages of a magazine with the Sultan's offer to buy the Golden Galleon. Velma found the defaced periodical on his desk, which later helped piece together the motive for the crime. Why tear out the pages? If Dilly knew the Sultan was offering $1 million for the Golden Galleon, what further information was needed? And since the pages were just an article about the coin and the foreign potentate's interest, it had nothing in it that would implicate Dilly if anyone found it. And even if he did need the pages for whatever reason, why keep the leftover magazine on his desk? And why was finding a magazine missing a few pages even suspicious to Velma in the first place? There are lots of reasons why people would tear them out. Recipes, contest entries, subscriptions, coupons, pictures of cute girls. Then again, this was literally the sole clue left by the villain. The only reason the gang were at the toy factory was because they followed the no-face zombie after they encountered it by chance on the street. They didn't even know who was in the gorilla suit until after Dilly was captured and unmasked. There were no clues in the episode that would have identified him as the villain. The only reason he was even a suspect was because he was one of the only 3 characters who happened to be at the factory, and we saw one of them getting kidnapped by the android. Indeed, of the 3 suspects, only the Watchman was big enough to fill out the gorilla suit. Except, Like the gorilla, he also changed sizes throughout the episode. How are they so easily able to drive a forklift through a standard doorway?
How do you stop this thing?
This is why you only let trained professionals drive forklifts. It would have been so much better for the episode to not even include a robot and just have Dilly wear the zombie disguise and the Watchman be in the gorilla suit.
Look out! The no-face zombie was only a computerized robot.
This is a good moment to reflect on the danger of being a Scooby villain. They were lucky this time around that the no-face zombie was just a robot, but if that had been the usual guy in a suit, we'd be looking at a homicide or involuntary manslaughter investigation right about now. Also, kudos to whoever drew this scene. They probably spent more time working on this single cell than most of the animators spent in a full episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies. There are two final things that bug me about the episode.
Mama, Mama, oh, now you've done it. Mama, 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 Mama.
Wow, danger-prone Daphne is really knocking it out of the park this time around, isn't she? The no-face zombie is constantly growling and moaning throughout the episode. How? He has no mouth and shouldn't be able to scream. You don't need to be Harlan Ellison to know that isn't right. Finally, why would the Sultan even need to steal the Golden Galleon in the first place? It was being held in a coin shop, not a museum. Even if the dealer demanded more than $1 million for it, surely the Sultan would have bought it without batting an eye.
Don't call me Shirley.
Hell, considering how flimsy the security was in the coin shop to begin with, the owner would have been smart to sell it as soon as possible. There wasn't even an alarm when the zombie ripped off the top of the case. I'm giving Dilly an operation score of 2 out of 5. I really like the android, and the man was clearly an engineering wizard, but there's just no way to overlook all the blunders. The no-face zombie's physical design is the only reason it wasn't a 1. This leaves the Crooked Toy Maker with a final due score of 2.3 out of 5. There are few better examples of a Scooby-Doo episode where an excellent monster design was this wasted. Even if Dilly had been the one in the no-face zombie disguise, the final score would still have barely been a 3. And that's my ranking of the villains from the 4th set of episodes of the 1st season of the Scooby-Doo show, shown here along with the ones from my previous videos. This was a strange one. I wasn't really that impressed with the Ghost of Dr. Coffin, yet he now has the highest rating for this series so far. And as much as I had been looking forward to my childhood traumatizing no-face zombie, the episode ended up being a huge disappointment. This time around, I can't even make any apologies for the villain by saying, at least the episode was good, because it really wasn't. The Scooby-Doo show started out so strongly, but we're already starting to see some of the seams showing. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon below, but please only join if you're comfortable doing so. Patreon members receive credit in my videos for as long as they remain a member, as well as a personal shout out in the next regular video produced after they join. Carl the Stuntman.